Colin's dad is 150% Scopper Gaban. Used to be a pirate, come on. He's basically telling us at this point. So the funny thing is that just knowing he was a pirate doesn't narrow down the list of candidates at all, because all of the major theories already assume that this guy was a pirate. And something very interesting about Colin is that, like all the giants, it's very difficult to tell how old he is. Due to the slow aging of giants, he could even be older than most of the Straw Hats, which would make sense with some sort of Scopper Gaban based timeline, because after the Roger Pirates split up, that was when Ace was conceived, and much later than it should have been, eventually born. And in Big Mom's flashback, we see a tiny, perhaps Colin-sized Harudin, and he's currently 18 years old at this point, although I would argue that Colin currently resembles the more pudgy baby Harudin that Oda adorably drew that one time. Whoever the father is, though, he deserves more credit than most, I think, because this is a rare occasion in One Piece where it appears that the father hasn't outright abandoned the child. And actually, you know what? Ripley, she deserves credit as well, because this is a rare case in One Piece where the mother hasn't tragically died. So you know what? We've got an uncharacteristic good little family thing happening here. Crack theory, though, I've mentioned this before, but the one thing that stops me going all in on Scopper Gaban is Ripley's age. She said that she was from the last generation of trained Elbaf warriors, which likely refers to Harudin's generation. So Ripley would be around 80, whereas Scopper Gaban would be in his late 70s by now, if that is indeed the generation in question. It may not be, but if it is, then Scopper Gaban is not much younger than Ripley. So what if we start looking at the generation after? Enter Mad Lad Rouge, a man who enjoys a challenge and his hobby is canonically lovemaking. The dude likes to get around, and it would be a wild way to get our final worst generation member into the story before we head off into Laugh's Tale and do all of the final war stuff. To be clear, I don't think this is the case at this stage, but it would be pretty funny if it was. Seems parking your bicycle in an airplane hangar is more effective than you thought, internet man? Look, I never said that the bicycle wouldn't get parked. I just thought that the airplane hangar was excessive. There's a saying in my language, with some will and a little bit of skill, even an elephant can screw a chicken. You have a beautiful language. I would have been shocked by Ripley and her husband's mechanics if Big Mom's family didn't exist. So here's something that we should clarify, because this is scale in One Piece, it's difficult to get your head around. Mostly because Oda consistently changes it depending on what art looks cooler. But Big Mom is a lot less big than her name would imply, and a lot more mother than you would initially think. But she often looks the size of a giant, but in fictional reality she's only 8.8 meters tall, whereas Harudin, for example, is 22 meters tall. So there is still a pretty colossal difference between them. And Kaido, mate, he's even smaller than Big Mom. He's just over 7 meters tall. So compared to Charlotte Lin Lin, Kaido would be defined as a short king, or perhaps a short emperor. Although I should also point out that Big Mom did conceive a child with a tontara, so that resets the scale and completely invalidates my argument. Harold committed word I can't say on YouTube, and Loki is protecting his father's giant pride, which died in a non-warrior way. It's definitely another avenue. Whatever happens from here, I do think that there is going to be a tragic twist in regards to blaming Loki for Harold's death, and it could be something along those lines. Loki sacrificing his freedom and his honors to make sure that his father was given a warrior's death, at least as far as the other residents of Elbaf are concerned anyway. And I would say that word I can't say on YouTube is too dark for One Piece, but we've recently seen a panel of Child Robin considering just that. And I was wrong about Ginny when I said that it would be too dark for One Piece to have her forced into intimate scenarios. Although neither of those situations were explicitly mentioned or shown, they were obviously and heavily implied. But at the moment, I'm still on board with the Harold wasn't as good of a guy as everyone thinks, and Loki is putting on an act to protect Elbaf, but it could definitely go in a bunch of other directions as well. Another popular TV series had a character labeled Kingslayer, bad action done for a noble reason. That's true, and that other TV series would be Game of Thrones, referring to Jaime Lannister, a guy initially portrayed as an unambiguous villain, in somewhat the same way that Loki is currently being treated. And in this chapter, I don't know if the term Kingslayer will officially be used, but it's the same idea, and I do think that we're setting up for a similar reveal. And the Game of Thrones comparison doesn't come out of nowhere, because Eiichiro Oda is allegedly quite a big Game of Thrones fan. Although I should say that there is no official statement from Oda directly. This comes from Greg Werner, who works with Shueisha, and as an advisor on the live-action series, who has met Oda many times, and was apparently the one to introduce him to Game of Thrones. Well, a long story less long, the Loki Kingslaying plot could be inspired by that, or it could be inspired by not that, or it could not exist at all. One of those options will be correct. The knights teleporting directly into the throne room right at the foot of the throne is still the sketchiest thing going on. So to add to the idea of King Harold maybe not being such an amazing guy, it is interesting that the Holy Knights had a fast travel point to a throne room in Elbaf. Now we still don't know exactly how this ability works, but if an Elder Star in the past were to have visited Elbaf to conduct some nefarious plottings with King Harold, then it may have been a good idea to mark the throne room with a method of transportation for quick and easy communication. Or we could go even further back. Let's say that during the Void Century, Emu was on Elbaf for whatever reason and decided to leave a fast travel waypoint there just in case. Because the alternative to that sort of restriction would be that the world government can essentially travel anywhere they want at any time, in which case we are not safe anywhere. But as for why the knights are here, one thought I had is that they could have been sent to retrieve Loki's Devil Fruit, aka kill him in order to take the power, and they've been sent here now because the world government are fully aware that Luffy has awakened his innate sun god abilities, and they need something to combat those powers. And so Loki's legendary Devil Fruit combined with his own outrageous claims of being the sun god could do just that. The only way to combat a god is with your own god. You gotta fight fruit with fruit. It is a fruit fight. Both giants didn't recognize the cloaked man, so he's definitely not Shanks. I actually see that differently. I see that as evidence that they haven't properly seen his face. Because my thinking is that once they do see his face, they'll immediately go, yo, Shanks, mate, didn't expect to see you back here so soon. And then it would take a while to realize, wait a minute, he has 2 arms and I, miscellaneous giant, am pretty sure that Shanks only had 1 of those. But then while this thought process is happening, Figgle and Frank has already sliced him to pieces. Something like that. I need you to ask your artist to redraw Robin with her Elbaf outfit with her bangs. If you can't pay them, I'll do it for you. That's a very generous offer, but it's already been done. But what I will say is that if you would like to contribute, then you can become a channel member. All of those funds, as well as any sponsorships we take, go directly to paying the artists and editors of Grand Line Review because they're expensive as crap, and rightfully so because they do amazing work. I really like how Colin is essentially a reversal of Vicky the Viking. Yes, that's very important to linger on. Vicky the Viking was a major inspiration for One Piece, and Colin's design is based on the titular Vicky. However, Vicky in the show is the exact opposite of him. Vicky was a very polite and violence-averse boy who grew up in a rowdy, violent-centric Viking village. Vicky wasn't strong at all, but he was smart, real smart. And it was often Vicky's intelligence in combination with the strength of his fellow Vikings that got everyone out of rough situations. And our Colin is the opposite. He's a natural-born warrior, growing up in a tribe of polite enlightenment, which I will refer to from here on out as politenment. And I'm fascinated by this, because usually the message in this sort of thing would be that violence isn't always the answer. But it looks like Colin's arc is putting us on the path of, no wait, sometimes violence is the acceptable answer and we should do it. Anyone else notice the Oni girl amongst the giant children? The one that calls Colin a brute? That's a very good eye. There is indeed a horned woman in this chapter. And this is very easy to miss because a lot of Elbaf residents wear helmets with Viking horns. But this woman here just naturally has horns popping out of her head, which is the same trait that we saw a lot on Wano with characters like Kaido, Yamato, Black Maria, Ulti, and Page 1. And this woman isn't even the only one. One of the children being terrorized by Luffy on the swing also has natural horns, as does a young girl yelling in the crowd. And if you look closely enough, you'll probably be able to find even more. So there's definitely some diversity happening on Elbaf. And this could be the arc where we find out how the Oni came to be. Or these children could be descendants of ancient giants who are also horn-clad, or perhaps even the Oni themselves were descendants of the ancient giants. Whatever it turns out to be, the seeds are all here, out in the open. There's a ton of characters with natural horns in your face, and at some point, we're going to find out why. Hold'em was a headliner, the same level as Hawkins and Apu. The guy fought Ashura Doji as well. You're telling me a kid as weak as Otama defeated someone like him? It's laughable, but to make it make sense, at least a little, Lamau. Alright, so a couple of things. The first and most important is that Tama hasn't defeated Hold'em. She's just kicked him in the face. Secondly, Hawkins was a headliner, but to the best of my knowledge, Scratchman Apu was not. When he was reintroduced, he was called the Beast Pirates Informant, so he was kind of like their very flamboyant one-man cypherpole unit. And thirdly, aside from Hawkins, the headliners all kind of sucked. You know who else is a headliner? Fortrix, the man whose face was the butt of a chicken. And if you look at the full list of headliners, there isn't a single notable presence among them in terms of actual strength. They're mostly jokes like Hamlet or Briscola, or background utility characters like Bao Huang. So I don't see it as weird that Tama got the better of Hold'em, and if anything, it's more of an indictment of Basil Hawkins that he was only able to rise to the level of headliner, whilst Giga Chads like Diaz Drake went on to become a Toby Roper. Internet man, you seem to have forgotten we finally got the new outfits for the remaining Straw Hats. Sometimes I do forget things, but other times I'm strategically not mentioning them. And in this case, I waited to talk about the new outfits because I think I'd be doing this channel a disservice if I did so without our art. But our crew art is ready now. In fact, our full crew are now finally dressed to impress, and my favorite of these 4 new outfits is definitely Jinbei, because a man of his width really suits the giant aesthetic, because he has the size to pull it off. I love the fur cloak and the massive belt with the dragon or the Sea King or whatever it is on it. And I think he's carrying a mighty axe on his back, which I would love to see him actually use at some point, because the idea of Jinbei combining Fishman Karate with any kind of weapon just seems appealing to me. But the next most notable outfit is probably Robin, and it's notable because it's actually quite conservative by her standards, and this makes sense because this set of Straw Hat outfits were made by Gerd, whereas the first 6 were made by Rode. So you can really see the difference in priorities between the two giants when you compare Nami and Robin especially. But in general, what Gerd has done, she's focused on accuracy. She's given the crew mini Elbaf outfits, whereas Rode has focused on fantasy. His outfits are designed for his heightened fabricated world, where the men look as cool as possible and the women look as physically appealing as possible. But with that said, Frankie and Brooke they're pretty alright. I'm not hugely over the moon with either of them. With Frankie, I think it's because I already miss his cowboy look. And Brooke seems like he's just been given a very standard outfit, whereas I feel like him being a skeleton usually gives Oda license to be much more creative with him. I do really like Frankie's beard though. And you know what? I think we need more beards for the crew as a whole, because Usopp and Frankie look so good with them. And as for the crew, something that we should also point out is that they have now split up again, which generally indicates that stuff is about to go down. The Straw Hats very rarely encounter proper danger with all 10 of them together, because when they're all together, there's really almost nothing that could possibly threaten them. But Robin and Chopper are now in their group. Frankie's gone off looking in trees or something, and the rest of the crew have gone off to party, which will probably fracture further from there, and we'll get into the standard crew pod chaos. The owl can't modify the size of living beings. It is specified in the chapter. Alright, so I want to be clear that in the last video, when I implied that a centuries-old owl used its magical fruit powers on a penis, that was a joke. However, it has brought up a rather interesting translation issue that I didn't notice. We won't have the official English translation to clear this up for a while because that's how One Piece works with the New Year break. The chapter leaks very, very early. However, thanks to the official French translation being mistakenly uploaded to Manga Plus, which is still up by the way, they haven't fixed it yet. But thanks to that, we do have an official source of this owl text, and it says the following: Il peut rendre énorme tout ce qui est inorganique, which is very poor pronunciation, but it is very clear wording. It says that the owl can only make inorganic things grow. However, this is very, very different to what we currently have in English, where what we see is Lilith saying to think even inorganic things can grow with this power, which is potentially very poor wording because it implies that the fruit definitely obviously affects organic things. And it's actually surprising that it can also be used on inorganic things as well. To think that even inorganic things, I was thinking that it was just organic. For now, I would definitely believe the official French. However, I will say that I'm personally hoping that the scans are correct, because if so, could be setting up a future where this owl uses its abilities to do something very, very cool, like say briefly turn the Straw Hats into giants to do battle on Elbaf. But even if it is just objects, the ancient owl doesn't feel like just set dressing to me. Yes, it could just exist to explain how giants can read books, but it could also be a setup for a potential plot point down the line to make something real big, because we've got to remember that this is not just some random owl. This owl is so old that none of the giants seem to know exactly how old it is, which is crazy because giants already live for hundreds of years. So right now we could be seeing a creature that lived during the Void Century for all we know. And hey, this owl-based conspiracy could run even deeper than we know. Depending on which translation is correct, this could be big stuff, because we could even begin thinking of wild ideas such as, do giants even exist? Or has the entire race of giants just been subject to the abilities of this owl? Did this owl make a whole ton of people real big a long time ago, and did that go on to become the giant race? Again, this sort of thinking is not currently supported in French, but lack of French support has never stopped English speakers from doing stupid things before. In fact, I think it only encourages us. And if there's anything that Elbaf has taught me in its short time so far, it's that apparently anything and everything is possible, as One Piece is now more of a fantasy series than it's ever been before. Although there's still something about Elbaf that lingers uncomfortably with me, which is that as great as everything is, we are on the verge of very much ignoring that warning about not overstaying our welcome on this island. And I don't think we're gonna have to wait too long to find out what those consequences are.